Hi everyone and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I want to talk about a topic that is brought up much more by Muslims and Western apologists or progressives than by critics of Islam. Are all Muslims bad? The short answer would be no. Of course, not all Muslims are bad, because there is every type of person in this world. And there are very good people of horrible backgrounds and very bad people of wonderful backgrounds in this world. But I also never heard anyone claiming that all Muslims are bad, horrible, radical terrorists. Every single one of them. But there are significant numbers of Muslims in the world, much more so than people of other beliefs, that have very bad views about basic human rights that we have in the West today. They have horrible views about women, about freedom of speech, about freedom of religion, about homosexuals, and so on. The mainstream media in the West always brings up the 1%, claiming that only 1% of Muslims are actually radicals. The problem is that they refer to actual armed terrorists who actually kill people as radicals. But those are not the only ones that are radical. What I, together with many other people, define as radical are people who clearly think and say that people who choose a different belief over Islam should be killed. People who commit apostasy. They are those who think that a woman should always obey her husband. Those who think that homosexuals should be persecuted and homosexuality should be banned. Radicals would be people who want to implement Sharia law, who favor Sharia law over secular law. And Sharia includes so much more than these disgusting things that we just mentioned. If you are a subscriber to my channel, you will probably see very soon an explanatory video about Sharia, the whole breakdown. This video is a message to all those Western self-proclaimed humanists who think that it is somehow their humane duty to protect Islam and Muslims from every kind of criticism and blame. For those who are not familiar with me and my channel, I am an ex-Muslim who spent 16 years in Germany and 10 years in Turkey before I moved to America. First, I want to address those that we see the most. They appear everywhere on social media, on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, whatnot. They think by knowing one person, they have all the wisdom in the world, and they tell you to shut up when you start to speak about Islam. They are also usually very intelligent, very eloquent, and very polite, if you believe that. I'm talking about those who always talk against Islamophobia because they have one or two Muslim friends, and those Muslim friends are always totally nice to them. They are friends with them. And they think, well, my Muslim friends are so nice. I mean, how can these people talk about Islam? If my Muslim friends are so nice and so friendly with me, then that means that Islam is a peaceful religion and all Muslims are peaceful. Well, don't you have Christian friends? Don't you have white people as friends, who are the absolute majority in the West? Don't you have them as your teachers, as your colleagues, as your neighbors? They are everywhere around you. And most of them are much friendlier than people that you can find in the Islamic world. I'm saying this because many of those who jump into the defense immediately once Islam is criticized are also people who want to blame every single bad thing that happens in the West on Christians and conservatives and white people and so on. Because what drives them to defend Islam and Muslims is not social justice. It is the irrational, rebellious attitude that they have towards their own culture or towards their own norms. You might have Muslim friends that are also very friendly and very nice and quite peaceful. That's not a surprise, because if you live in North America and you research a bit about North American Muslims, then you will find out that North American Muslims are the least religious ones in the world. And so, consequently, also the most peaceful ones. It's no surprise that North American Muslims are usually the more peaceful ones in the world, because moving to North America, especially to the US, is pretty much is very, very much harder than moving to Europe. And people who actually choose to move to America are people who are rather secular in their worldviews, but still culturally Muslims. I mean, they still have this attitude that they always have to protect Islam from criticism and that Islam is superior, but they are still rather culturally Muslims. If you live in Europe, and Europe is much, much more easier to move to as a Muslim, people are less peaceful and a bit more religious, but they are still better than people in Pakistan. I'm sorry, I had to do this. The reason is very clear. People who choose to live in the Western world, people who choose to move to the West, are usually people who just want to move out of their world, to move into a better life. And that change in their life also changes their perspectives on many things. Second generations that come from those Muslims who immigrate to the West usually don't learn much about their own religion. They grew up mostly as cultural Muslims. And they learn basic Western values when they grow up. They are usually cultural Muslims, and they are also those who will deny every negative fact that you present them about Islam, because they don't know about their religion, because they don't learn about the religion. They only know that they are supposed to be proud Muslims, that Islam is superior, that criticizing Islam is a horrible act. And they learn basic Western values and combine them with Islamic rules, or confuse them. As a result, they are still misogynistic and homophobic and anti-Semitic, but they also don't believe that Islam teaches anything that is too bad from a Western perspective. They don't even want to look at it because they don't want to learn about it, because they are afraid of it. That's, by the way, one of the main reasons why I chose to inform people about Islam. So your Muslim friend doesn't really mean anything in this whole discussion. Knowing a Muslim doesn't make you an Islamic scholar. Your Muslim friend is only an individual that is very far from knowing everything about Islam. Many have no idea about what the religion teaches. Well, all of this aside, Muslims are still disproportionately active in criminal activity, and Muslims are still disproportionately hateful. I just talked about how Muslims in the West are so much different, but they are not actually that different. I mean, they are not as different as you think they are. If you grow up in a Muslim family, and I talked about this before, you still grow up with massive hatred of Jews, of the West, of anyone who criticizes Islam, or of the kuffar, the infidels. As I mentioned in another video before, Turkish Muslims, for example, still use the word gavur, which is a very derogatory term for non-Muslims. They use it everywhere. It's quite normal. And they don't see it as a problem. And they insult people among themselves. They insult non-believers among themselves. And that's not a problem. As said, even if they are, on average, still worse than non-Muslims, your Muslim friends are quite different from the Islamic world. The Islamic world is by far the worst when it comes to basic human rights, and it doesn't seem to get better very quickly. There is no free speech in the Islamic world, for example. In the Islamic world, there is no place, there is almost no country where you can freely criticize the dominant religion, which is in this case Islam, the government, the president, the country, and so on. You don't have those rights. They don't exist. So, dear Western liberals, who can freely say whatever they want about the local religion, about the government, about the president, about the country, can you imagine living in fear whenever you criticize any of those things mentioned? Can you imagine being fined, jailed, killed, or tortured for saying anything about white people, Christians, the government, the country? That's horrible for you to imagine, right? Well, that's the truth in the Islamic world. That's what it looks like. And it's not that countries are just ruled like that and the people are oppressed. That's not the case. The majority of Muslims approve of punishments and prosecutions for people who actively criticize the local religion or the government or the country. Free speech doesn't exist in the Islamic world. It exists in your world, in the West. And that's why you should appreciate and defend it. I made a series of videos where I shared numbers, all based on authentic polls, that show that scary numbers of Muslims think that women should always obey their husbands, homosexuals should be persecuted, blasphemy must be punished, apostates like myself should be killed or persecuted, that wife-beating is a right, that religious judges should rule over families, that Sharia law should be implemented, and so on. All of these numbers exist, and they are only seconds away if you have internet access. But I will make it easier for you, and I will link some of the researches below in the description if you want to make a little research to change your mind about things. For starters, the majority of Muslims think that a woman should always obey her husband. And I don't see loud feminists speaking up against such a mindset. They speak about other things like mansplaining, manspreading, or the right to have a hairy armpit. The problem is that Western self-proclaimed humanists who want to who want to provide social justice, think that Islam is only treated unfairly because people are ignorant about Islam. But it's usually the opposite. People embrace Islam as a culture that needs to be protected because they are ignorant. Many Western Islam apologists have no idea about what the Quran teaches, have no idea about what Islam is. And they think that when they are provided with very easily accessible Quran verses or hadith, facts about the Islamic religion, they think that those are only Islamophobic propaganda, because they don't want to spend an hour actually informing themselves about the religion. I see so many claiming that Islam is a religion of peace and that it shouldn't be criticized because that's racism and Islamophobia. But the same people never want to engage in an intellectual debate with you, never want to care about facts, never want to care about numbers, never want to care about actual Quran verses. They just dismiss that and call you racist. And they want to shut you down. And they call you out so that others shut you down too. They don't care about facts. They care about their political agenda. And the mainstream media doesn't really help to educate people because the mainstream media doesn't want to educate people. The mainstream media feeds on people. And they only want to confirm the feelings and thoughts of those who support them. That's why Western mainstream media don't make per capita calculations when it comes to Islamic terrorism or Muslim criminals, because the results would look very, very bad for them. And that would make the Western left feel uncomfortable, which results in the media losing support from the left. But they talk immediately about per capita statistics when the topic is police shootings and the demographics of white people and black people that are victims in police shootings, because that suits their agenda. As an ex-Muslim who grew up in a religious family and spent more than a decade in the Islamic world, and I'm talking about Turkey, which is a very moderate Muslim country, I can tell you that Muslims grow up with deep-rooted hatred of Jews, Christians, atheists, homosexuals, transgender people, equality, women's rights activists, critics of Islam, apostates from Islam, and so on. They are not like you, and they probably will never be like you, unless they abandon their religion, which puts an Islamic target on their forehead, and a killing order that is a fundamental rule in Islam that was always there, the killing of apostates. As said, I'm not saying that every Muslim out there is a horrible human being and a radical terrorist. That would be absurd. But I have also never seen anyone making such a claim, that every single Muslim who exists out there is a horrible human being. People talk about how Muslims on average are disproportionately hateful and radical. They are not saying that everyone is. People talk about how Islam is bad. They're not saying that all Muslims are bad. That's also not any form of racism. When people leave Islam, they become quite open-minded, quite normal people that are also liked by critics of Islam. We are not talking about a race, something that people have to live with forever. We are talking about a religion, an ideology that turns people into horrible people with horrible ideas and views. Just take a normal Western people, for example. Someone who makes wrong decisions and finds himself in a Nazism. Years later, the same person regrets Nazism, finds it wrong, abandons it, and starts fighting for human rights and starts to fight against Nazism. Just a normal human being with flaws, who was horrible at some time and became much better afterwards, right? Well, would you take millions of such people while they are Nazis as your neighbors? No. Would you take them as your neighbors after they abandon Nazism? Probably yes. Now apply the same thing to Islam. Thank you for watching. That's all I have to say right now. I will be back with another video at some time where I will break down the numbers and show you how many, what percentage of Muslims are actual radicals. If you like this video and if you like my content, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share it everywhere on social media. You can also follow me on social media for updates. I'm very active on Twitter and on Instagram. I also have a Patreon page. If you want to support me there, I would very much appreciate it, so that we can focus together on scrutinizing Islam and showing everyone what a religion Islam actually is. Thank you so much again for watching. Have a great weekend and stay away from Islam.